Day 834 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 516,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,080 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, a paltry 6 tanks, 20 APVs, and a mind-blowing 64 artillery systems, resulting from heated up engagements all along the eastern Donbass region, as the Russian war machine is on a potentially unprecedented offensive wave simultaneously in a large number of areas in the east. Then headed to the Ukrainian map as one such area that Russia has sought to utilize to keep the AFU otherwise engaged, to use it as a means to divert Ukrainian resources so as to use that as a springboard to perform all of those simultaneous attacks, is for here in the north. And so for this area, here's a recent piece of footage chopped up into stills of a Russian soldier on a motorbike traveling through the bordering checkpoint at Pilna, where you can see vehicle after vehicle of the Russian forces permanently engaged in their positions. And with the soldier riding up this single road in the space of about a minute, you see roughly 10 vehicles destroyed, most of which are transport vehicles, or better put, civilian Buhanka van transport vehicles. Which actually goes a long way to help explain the proliferating usage of the motorbikes here and elsewhere by Russian forces. And as for these stills, given that we don't see any impact craters on the road, compounded by the fact that many Russian reports have identified superior AFU drone capabilities in the north, then it's a fair enough expectation that most, if not all of these vehicles right here were taken out by AFU quadcopters. Not that any of these results found here causes Russia to rethink their strategy, as instead they just keep adding fuel to the fire here and elsewhere. In fact, the Russian MOD just announced that they have started rotating unit personnel on this very axis, although realistically it's likely to be more of a non-rotating replacement, if you know what I mean, because a Russian rotation is never going to happen that quickly after only having just started an incursion 3 weeks prior. Then specifically, as for Vovchansk, where most intense battles rage, Russian sources themselves identified that the AFU managed to take a couple of high-rise buildings in the high-rise area of the town, with further battles on the outskirts, and that the AFU forces constantly perform counterattacks. Then we take a look slightly southeast of here, as Russian forces advanced on a section just north of the settlement of Ivanivka. But for exactly this point here on the map, it still seems to be a methodology of the Russian army that seems unchanging, as in this instance, the AFU remotely mined the location using a hexacopter, with the Russian vehicles driving into the zone so nonchalantly, as it appears to be more or less how Russia identifies Ukrainian defenses, coming from a position of acceptance or acceptability from an ongoing Russian attritional point of view. Then moving further south, as near the city of Luhansk, there are reports of missile strikes on the city in the last few hours, reportedly ATACMS missiles on a Russian base. Nowhere seems safe for the invaders. Then to Chasiv Yar, directly west of there, as Russian forces are trying to wiggle their way through, but this time somewhat literally through the pipelines, in the hope of being undetected. So they wanted to utilize the pipelines to get out to the other side so as to flank Chasiv Yar undetected, but it just wasn't the case. Then headed down south, as it was reported that 2 radar stations were damaged as a result of a nighttime drone attack in Crimea, about 50 kilometers west of Kerch. And also, just yesterday in this region, so Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence achieved a significant victory by destroying a critical Russian Project 498 Saturn-class tugboat near the coast off occupied Crimea. This tugboat was essential for transporting heavy military equipment and supplies from mainland Russia to Crimea. The operation, meticulously carried out by the HUR's 9th Special Unit, involved the use of kamikaze surface drones, which breached Russian defenses in the Black Sea, And the video here that was released by the HUR on Telegram showcased the precision and coordination of the operation. The drones first breached a floating barrier and then methodically targeted and struck the tugboat, inflicting devastating fire damage. And it is really interesting seeing the footage of one of the naval drones passing by the floating barrier and just doing so casually. And I'm sure I've made at least a couple of jokes about naval drones simply buzzing around barriers before, because the dream of complete barrier protection throughout all of the Black Sea and Crimea is just a myth. And even if they did manage it, they've got to leave their dock at some point or be somewhat locked in there, twiddling their thumbs waiting for an aerial strike, or undocking with a loitering naval drone just waiting at sea for the next Russian Navy ship. And we haven't even considered deep underwater drones in this dynamic yet. Then looking around the map, because somewhere in the east we saw a burning Russian T-90M, so latest variant M release, retreat after a Ukrainian FPV drone strike, and that guy has some prime seating on the turret toss ride. Then also we saw the destruction of a Russian BTR-80 armoured personnel carrier in Donetsk. And the reason for the double image in this case is likely due to the optics mode set up at the time due to dawn engagements where the skies were starting to get bright. Then we saw yet another repelling of a Russian attack in the Novomikhailivka area. Russia keeps losing a lot of hardware on that front. Then headed across to some news for today. So the Japanese Ministry of Defense has delivered a batch of 101 vehicles to aid the Ukrainian army. This assistance comes following decisions made last summer underscoring Japan's commitment to supporting Ukraine amid its ongoing conflict. The vehicles arrived in Poland on June 5th and were subsequently transferred to Ukraine, enhancing Ukraine's military mobility and operational readiness. And Ukraine is always very grateful to gain additional vehicles for their army, as vehicles can serve so many roles from transport to evac to auxiliary fighting vehicles and much more. Then for a big hardware news update, French President Macron has announced that France will supply Ukraine with Mirage 2000-5 multi-role fighter jets. The announcement came yesterday following the 80th anniversary of the D-Day commemorations in Normandy. In his address, Macron highlighted that France will not only transfer the jets, but also train Ukrainian pilots in France. Now, so far, the exact numbers of Mirage 2000 jets and the timeline for their delivery was not quite specified, and will certainly come long after the F-16s arrive. But nonetheless, they are a versatile aircraft capable of carrying a wide variety of air-to-air and air-to-surface missiles, including the Storm Shadows or Scalp missiles, and other laser-guided glide munitions too. Also, the upgraded 2000-5 version features advanced radar systems and the ability to carry fuel drop tanks, significantly extending their range. And these ones are a 4th generation fighter jet, which is in some ways comparable to the US-made F-16s. Then in some other news, Yevhen Belitsky, a Russian proxy leader in the occupied Zaporizhia Oblast, has suggested that the Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine might be organized into a new federal district, as reported by Russian media outlet RIA Novosti. So this proposal includes the territory seized during Russia's full-scale invasion, specifically parts of Kherson, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and of course the annexed region of Crimea. Plus, Belitsky indicated that discussions for this district, potentially named Novorossiya, are currently underway at the federal level within Russia. Noting also that this term resurrects a historical concept from back in 2014, initially aimed at establishing an independent state from Luhansk and Donetsk. Now, the international community, including the UN, EU, NATO, and a majority of nations, has consistently condemned Russia's annexation of Ukrainian territories and the sham referendums held to justify these actions. So it looks like old Russian plans coming back into the fray. What we have here are long-time plans in the making, and truly, Russia would have taken all of Ukraine if it could. And yet some of the actions like these don't fit with the narrative that, for instance, the Luhansk and Donetsk regions apparently wanted to have their own unique land and identity and forge a new independent future for themselves, but in the end, everything seems to just lead back to Putin's expansionist ambitions for Russia. Then in some more news, Christophe Lemoyne, deputy spokesperson of the French Foreign Ministry, said Paris is considering how to respond to Russia's remarks, referring to French soldiers as being legitimate targets if they go to Ukraine to train soldiers. And Lemoyne initially followed up stating, quote, "These are outrageous statements that will not go unanswered." So at first I was surprised by this, then impressed, and thought maybe this is something that's needed. For instance, just one party within the Western Alliance taking a hardline approach to anything Russia says. And since this type of rhetoric is normally the de facto standard for Russian foreign policy statements, then maybe when Russia hears it from another nation, the Russian mafia bully state recognizes the anger it has when it sees it expressed by other nations. So newly found hardline approaches like these from France is now a new chapter or dynamic that Russia will have to learn to live with on the international political stage. And so this newly added dynamic playing out right now between France and Russia was unexpected but quite interesting, as it seems Russia is scrambling to even know how to respond to this newly seen French set of sentiments. Then in some other news, there's been some recent media reports going around indicating that Vladimir Putin has started wearing bulletproof vests under his clothes for public outdoor events on the recommendation of his security services. But a couple of things to say about this. First of all, this made it into one of my funnies a very long time ago. And second of all, we really cannot expect much else from that of any paranoid autocrat or dictator. But having said all that, let's just hope that Putin makes it a little less obvious next time, for his own sake. Then headed across to another Russian military mobilization blunder segment, as this latest account, well, talk about scraping the bottom of the barrel, as this account was from a family member who described their upset and shock about a Russian man with 2 amputated legs that was sent to the Russian SMO. Apparently sent to finish his service. She goes on to express anger about the standardized list where legless, armless, or eyeless individuals do not meet the eligibility criteria to actually go to the SMO, or any other war for that matter. Then she proceeds to state how education, money, transport, clothes, and nearly anything else in Russia has just skyrocketed in price since the start of the invasion of Ukraine. But I digress, and back to the legless man who was sent back to finish his service in the special military operation. Just when I think Russia can't get any lower, they consistently outdo themselves. How is this even possible? It's truly astonishing. Then headed across to a few rapid fire funnies to round it all off for today, guys. So first up, let's start off with some Kadyrov nepotism, as Kadyrov's nephew has become Chechnya's Minister of Transport. He inherited the post from his father, husband of Kadyrov's older sister. Gee, they even look alike. But not to be outdone, Kadyrov's eldest son, Akhmat, was appointed Chechnya's sports minister. He is 18 years old. So yep, that happened too. Then for a last quick funny, during Belarusian President Lukashenko's recent visit to the Mongolian capital, in the moment an utter champion of a man ran to the central square with a Ukrainian flag. So that was a nice touch. So thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for keeping up with the likes, the kind words, the support, and the comments. And as for the comments, if there is anything you want me to show more of, pop it in the comments, and I might then be able to see some common themes arise to act on. Truly, I have a whole bunch of shelved ideas already, but maybe there's some keen point of intersect we can find in all of that as well. So thanks again, and I hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!